I knew from the beginning that I was going to be speaking to bartenders. And so I logically knew the other thing too, right? Is how long it was going to take a bartender to have the aha moment, have the awareness, and then make a different choice, and then change their lifestyle, and then start learning about this, and then dip their toes in, and then still not pay, right? Like, I knew that this was a 3 to 5 year strategy. Like, I knew that people started listening 3 years ago would become clients today, right? Like, I knew that. And that was my intention, was to have this very long piece of the funnel, because I have a very short piece of the funnel with the Facebook group. People come into the Facebook group, they will join the Facebook group, and in 3 days, they will pay 10K, pay in full, and be in the program, right? That happens all the time, right? Bartenders are not going to behave like that.
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today, we have a unicorn. No, just kidding. We have Nicole, who is the host of Real Unicorns. Just kidding. We have the host, Nicole, of Real Unicorns Don't Wear Pants podcast. So much energy in this episode. She's talking through where her podcast fits in her funnel, how she built up her Facebook group before she launched her podcast, and the strategies behind how she uses her podcast to indoctrinate her audience, get them to know her, like her, trust her, and eventually buy from her, and where that fits into her funnel. This one is high on strategy and tactics. Definitely, if you are a business owner who's trying to figure out where your podcast fits in all this, this is an episode for you. All right, join me in welcoming Nicole to the podcast. Hello, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to chat with you. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and about your show.
So great to be here. My name is Nicole Hesse. I am a client attraction coach that specializes in mentorship and high-level strategic development. I started a podcast back in November of 2020 called Real Unicorns Don't Wear Pants. But this is all built on the foundation of being your true self unapologetically to attract your true believer. I work with coaches and experts and people that are just generally really good at what they do, and they want to open up an additional revenue stream using social selling strategies.
I love it. And like being yourself, I think is so important, especially in the face of a still very curated social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though people were like, no, this is real, like a lot of it still does definitely feel curated. So I love that you're talking about that. And I love your podcast title, because I am not creative whatsoever in the titles that I come up with. And like, my listeners have heard me say this so many times, but like my podcast that I have with my sister about cults is literally 2 sisters and a cult. This podcast, Listeners to Leads, like, what you see is what you get. And so I love Real Unicorns Don't Wear Pants, because it's like, wait a minute, what is that about? Right. And so I love that approach of like kind of drawing in your people who are like, wait, I'm a unicorn. I vibe with unicorns. Also, I vibe with no pants. So yes, like I'm here for it. Right. Which I believe is like the vibe you're going for. Right.
It attracts and it repels, you know, people are kind of like, who's this crazy girl? And like, what is she talking about? Right. So we have some of that, but you know, it's something that for me has like lots of personal layers and lots of personal meanings, which I think is so important. And I think people like that. I think people are interested in like kind of the Easter egg hunt of things. So it adds a kind of layer of iconic branding to it when you're using these more euphemism based names and titles, and it draws attention, right? Because you don't ever forget it. Like, it's not something where it just falls into, you know, I mean, there's so many like successful entrepreneur podcasts, right? Like,
Yes.
that's always the same. And so you can never remember which one was which and who was doing it. But like, you remember the crazy unicorn girl with no pants, you know, it's memorable.
Yes, exactly. So I know a lot of people who, you have a really big Facebook group, and a lot of people who launch podcasts, you do it either one of 2 ways. Either they'll start the podcast and then they launch their group after, or they launch the group, they grow that, and then they launch the podcast after. which strategy did you kind of go with?
So for me, I built the Facebook group first, and like I knew nothing about the coaching world, the online entrepreneurs, the courses. I like literally nothing, Jon Snow, right? Like absolutely nothing. So I didn't know anything. I got started very quickly. I opened my Facebook group. I launched a beta that was teaching people how to use social media strategies to sell their thing, right? I had no idea that this was going to work the way that it did, right? I had no clue, but I grew the Facebook group up to 10,000 members in the first 6 months. I had a $22,000 launch, and then I had a $60,000 launch. And by my 8th month, I had my first 6-figure month. I was up to $1 million in the first 13 months. It was crazy. Right. So everything was very rapid for the Facebook group. And so if we kind of look at that timeline, right, it's like I started the Facebook group in March and I started the podcast in November. And so that seems like a very short amount of time in a lot of ways. But if you talk about everything that happened in that span, it was bananas, like absolutely insane, because I had launched the beta, right? So I launched the beta got great results. And then I had done like 4 or 5 like really big launches. So by the time I opened the podcast, I had done about, I don't know, let's call it 250,000, maybe 300,000, but I launched it right after my first 6-figure month. So like that was like the affinity to it. And the group had probably about 12,000 people in it at that time.
Yeah. And I'm curious what your FaceTime, not Apple FaceTime, but like the time that you spend with your audience live in the Facebook group, interacting with the Facebook group, creating consistent content on a regular basis before you launch the podcast. What did that kind of look like? Just to give people, because people think, oh, I launched this group and it's great. And then all of a sudden, thousands of people just showed up. And it's like, that's not really how it works.
No.
Like it kind of takes effort.
No,
and like dedication.
I am the first to tell you, like, I am a prolific content creator. Like, I mean, like, I pump out content like it is nobody's business. Like, my content strategy is dialed in. Like, I do all the things. But for me, like, I love it. Like, a lot of people, like, really talk about this like it's work, right? They're like, I have to do my live today. I have to do a long post today. Like, I have to, like, run my group today. And I'm like, this is like nonsense. Like I'm like playing ponies on the internet with my friends. I like it. You know, it's fun for me. And so there isn't this like kind of energy around like I have to do it where like people are like, oh, it takes a lot of work. Like I worked in a bar. Okay. I worked in 3 bars at the same time. I worked 90 hours a week. I was on my feet 14 hours a day dealing with people telling me that I would be prettier if I smiled more. I'll take internet nonsense any day. Right. So it makes it fun and like that kind of energy. But like I had massive amounts of FaceTime with my audience and I very much treated them like bar guests. You know, it wasn't this like, they're not leads, they're not numbers, they're not like group members. They're people. It's Jennifer with her dog Samson and, you know, like they're real people, right? And so I had a lot of real time interaction with my audience to cultivate and develop it. I was really focused on connection and cultivation that led to that kind of conversion. I mean, in my, you know, not so popular opinion, I don't think that you get up to $1 million in your first year without really making it about people.
Yes, that people first aspect I think is so important because especially nowadays, people can sniff out if you're digging for the lead, right? If you're like, hey, you're just a number. Hey, you're just that icky salesman kind of vibe. Like people know they're not fooled anymore. Like by that. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. So when you decided, hey, I'm going to have this podcast, what were kind of the thoughts going through your head?
Well, I mean, first of all, it came from my coach, right? And so my coach kind of sat me down and he was like, hey, you're doing great. Like everything is amazing right now. This would really help you. And, you know, I have a very dynamic personality and brand persona, as you probably guessed from all the unicorns and the nonsense, right? So it's very unconventional what I'm doing. And so he was like, this would do really well on podcasts. And I was like, great. I don't know anything about that. I knew nothing about tech. I knew nothing about the software and the mics and like any of those things. And he was like, you know what, Nicole, it just doesn't matter. People love your voice so much and they love what you have to say and you are moving and shaking. The polarity is just more powerful than the tech. He's like, don't worry about it. He's like, handed me over the stuff. Like it was all like very basic and still like my podcast it does all the things. And you know, there's no egg cartons on the ceiling, right? Like I don't have a recording studio. It's not this thing of like expensive tech. And so he just told me, he was like, hey, you really just need to have another point of contact for your audience. And so what I began to realize was like, when do I listen to podcasts, right? Like, I mean, predominantly in the car. right? Like I listen in the car a lot. I listen at the gym, like when I'm working out, right? So it's this other, like it's not social media. It's different. And so the way I started thinking about that, I was like, oh, this is about omnipresence, right? Is like they can only be in my Facebook group when they're on their phone, but I can be in their ear in their car. I can be in their ear at the gym. And so that extra touch point, it's a different feeling. It's a different level of intimacy. And that's really what got the juices flowing of like how I was going to develop the brand voice and how I was going to do things differently. I wasn't concerned about the tech. It just didn't matter. I was focused on the connection and how I was going to speak with people, how I was going to be in their energy in a different way than what I showed up in the Facebook group. I think the mistake that a lot of people do is they just duplicate their Facebook group into their podcast. And it's like, why? Like,
No.
People don't want to listen to the same thing. Like they want to have a different feel. So my podcast has a completely different vibe, completely different energy, and even a completely different placement of target market than the Facebook group does.
Oh, I love that. And you know, I love the power of podcasting. To your point, like when do people listen to it, right? It's in their car. It's while they're cooking dinner. It's during these other moments. One of my really close business friends recently said she feels like her auditory memory is doing better, where she will remember something that she was like where she was at in a podcast conversation. If she stops it halfway through, she remembers what they were talking about. She remembers where were they leading to. And she's like, and I remember what I was doing as I was listening. And of course, I'm geeking out because I'm like, oh my God, yes, like this is the psychology of it is brilliant. I love it. Like I get jazzed, guys. I know people don't say that anymore, but I will. I get jazzed talking about podcasting because it is so powerful. You are in people's ears while they're going about their daily lives, and it has a bigger impact on the listeners and them remembering the things you're saying than a blog post does, than a TikTok does, than even a Facebook Live does, because they're watching it. They're watching you on YouTube, whatever. But when they're listening to you, you're with them, which what I like to say creates that celebrity effect. Like, oh my gosh, I feel like I know you because you're with them in their daily lives. It's not just like, oh, this expert that was here. No, you're their friend. And I love that. So have you, and I like to ask people this question, have you had anyone hop in a call with you and they just fangirl hard because they listen to the podcast?
I mean, this is a daily occurrence for me, right? Like if I'm on a call, like I offer 20-minute calls here and there, right? And so like if I'm getting 20-minute calls that are booked on my calendar, like that is always how it goes, right? Like, which is so weird.
Where's my crown?
Like, I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to say. Like I always tell them, I'm like, I'm just a bartender. Like I'm just a bartender. Like I'm a normal human. Like this is not a celebrity thing, right? Like, but yeah, absolutely. And I will find that to your point, the clients that come in who were podcast first, right? Who listen to the podcast first and then join the Facebook group are a different breed of client. They are people who intimately know me. They're people that are much more connected with the story of things. They're not just like in here, like, I just want to make money, right? They're like, no, like, I want you, right? And so there's like, I'm thinking of like one client specifically. It's like, I have such a more powerful, intimate relationship with her because she came in through the podcast. It indoctrinates your clientele in a completely different way, especially if you do this strategically. You know, it's like with my Facebook group, I didn't do this thing of like, you're supposed to follow this format and do this thing and follow the script. Like I didn't do any of that. I mean, all of my episodes are solo episodes for the first 2.5 years. And it's all very strategically aligned to help you to feel a feeling, to connect to the desire of the result. But I'm predominantly speaking to bartenders in my podcast. You know, I tell a lot of bar stories. I have a lot of relatability to the hospitality industry. I'm telling you about all the debauchery of the behind the scenes. So it's very reality TV, right? It's very like all the drama. I mean, I did some crazy things. I did some crazy things as a bartender. So I have incredible stories, right? And so like every once in a while I'll call my best friend. I'm like, dude, I need some more juice for the podcast. Like remember something for me, right? Like remember that time, right? And so we'll just sit there and go back and forth and talk about all the things that happened. And that gives such a different perception for your audience than like, this is my journey of how I made money and whatever in my business. Like they know me like the girl that ripped the girl off the bar stool that Friday night. They know the real me and they still chose me. It feels different, you know?
Yes. Oh, I love that. So you mentioned something that I want to bring back up. And that was that your podcast serves a different person in the journey of potentially working with you and connecting with you than those that join in the Facebook group. Why is that for people who are like, wait a minute, what do you mean? Because I know what you mean, but they might not know what you mean. You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together.
Okay, so if we think of the concept of funneling, right, is that we're taking a wider audience and we're moving it closer to us. We're warming them up. We're getting them closer to a conversion point. We're helping them to overcome their objections, right? So when we're doing this in a Facebook group, we know it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter what you sell. There's a point of entry. Okay. So if you're getting to the point where you're joining a Facebook group for a reason, you already have an idea that you want what is inside of this offer. Okay. So my Facebook group, it's called Unicorn Client Attraction Secrets for High Vibe Wonder Women, right? Okay. So because it's called Unicorn Client Attraction Secrets, everyone who joins that Facebook group already knows that they want more clients. Okay, that's where they are in their entrepreneurial journey. If they didn't, they wouldn't join a group called Client Attraction Secrets. And they're admitting that they don't have as many clients as they want by joining, right? Okay, so that's the monetizable angle of a Facebook group. Now, with a podcast, this is actually a wider piece of your funnel. Okay, and so for me, because I am a service industry junkie, right? Like I grew up in the bar and from the time I was 15 years old, like that's where I came from. I was mouthy bartender, right? So that bartender energy is different. Those people don't have online courses. They are not online entrepreneurs. They are not spending all day, every day in Facebook groups posting things like promote yourself. They're not doing that, right? They are not problem aware yet, right? So my top of funnel is taking bartenders and bringing in the awareness of like, hey, you have a problem that you don't know about. And this problem is the fact that your bartender career could go down the drain in 2 seconds if you break your arm, right? Could go down the drain from 2 seconds if we have a global pandemic and all of the bars shut down, right?
Yeah.
Could go down. You have no retirement plan. You have no exit strategy. You are literally working until you die. Okay. So I have a solution to that, is that you already have this bartender skill set that would work amazing in the coaching industry. Bartenders are incredible candidates to become online coaches, but they don't know that that's a problem. And they don't know that this world existed, just like I didn't know that it existed. So I'm speaking to them at the top of the funnel and bringing them in. Now they listen to the podcast because they're listening to it from a bartender angle and they want to hear my bar stories, right? And so then they start getting this thought in their head of like, maybe I could do this, right? Like maybe I could be making $100,000 a month. Like I knew this girl back in bartender land. She's not that special. I can probably do this, right? And so then they join the Facebook group, right? So it's a point of entry to the Facebook group. Now, lots of people in the Facebook group listen to the podcast and go the other direction as well, but that was not the intention of the brand.
Yes. And I really think that it goes down to, yes, people can cross-pollinate wherever they need to within the circle of your content. And like taking them from, all right, you've got your Facebook group, your podcast, where you might be guesting on podcasts, your emails that you send out every week. And it just keeps this cycle of like indoctrinating them and getting them comfortable with you and getting to know you and you getting to know them and what their issues are. So then you can create better content for them. But to your point, being very strategic about it. And I think that a lot of people go into podcasting as it's going to be great. I saw everybody else do it and it's going to be this thing. But if you don't approach it strategically, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of effort. And you're going to end up stopping because 90% of people who start a podcast don't make it past 25 episodes. because they don't realize how much effort it can actually take to be strategic about it. They think, oh, I'm just going to throw it up there. This is long game, guys. And Nicole, I'm sure you can attest to this. Your podcast listeners are binge listeners. Like they want to listen to everything that you've got. And so like you have to keep showing up. You're not going to get those results right away, but the people that come through are going to be incredible clients.
Yeah. I mean, when I was thinking about this, I mean, like now I mean, obviously after 2.5 years, like you have a different perspective of all the things, but I knew from the beginning that I was going to be speaking to bartenders. And so I logically knew the other thing too, right? Is how long it was going to take a bartender to have the aha moment, have the awareness, and then make a different choice, and then change their lifestyle, and then start learning about this, and then dip their toes in, and then still not pay, right? Like I knew that this was a 3 to 5 year strategy. Like I knew that people started listening 3 years ago would become clients today, right? Like I knew that. And that was my intention, was to have this very long piece of the funnel, because I have a very short piece of the funnel with the Facebook group. People come to the Facebook group, they will join the Facebook group, and in 3 days, they will pay $10K painful and be in the program, right? That happens all the time, right? Bartenders are not going to behave like that. And so it was a long game strategy from the start. So I never had an intention of stopping. And I think this is something that you probably see with this, is that people have this thing of like, well, I did it for a minute and I didn't get any clients, so I stopped doing it. And it's like, that's not how that works. Like if you're starting a podcast to get clients now, don't. That's not the name of the game, right? Like it's not supposed to be this direct correlation, like A plus B equals C. That's not how it works. It's part of your overarching brand. It's part of your full saturation strategy. It is part of indoctrination and like the becoming energy. Like if you're just doing this to get clients, like go start a Facebook group. That's what you should do to get clients. Like this is about indoctrination. This is about starting a movement. This is about perpetuating a concept and an idea that has much more to do with group economics and how people behave in a social environment than it does with making direct money.
Yes. I think we're done. I mean, you literally like, that's what I've been saying, guys. So much, but it's so true. And I mean, Nicole's seen it. I've seen it time and time again. People come to me and they're like, so how soon will I make my money back with this podcast thing? And I'm like,
wrong question.
First of all, like, and I'm very upfront with potential clients of like, look, I got the strategies, I have the experience, but this is a long game. And like, we can hand you off to somebody else and that's fine. But also, no, like it does not happen overnight. And you have to be really strategic with where it fits in, where you're trying to teach your potential leads and your potential clients and like where you want to guide them. Like you have to be really strategic about it. Can't just throw spaghetti at the wall and hope it sticks. It's not what podcasting is.
I had no idea too, like about the metrics, right? It's like, it's very difficult to find information about like what the metrics mean. They'll give you the metrics, like no matter what host you're using, it's like, oh, they'll tell you how many downloads and they'll show you this cool map. And you're like, I don't have all these things. And like, I'm going to know everything. And then you do it. And then you're like, okay, cool. Now what does it mean? But there's no one to compare it to. And so many people are so private about their metrics that it's like, you don't know. I mean, I had to like hunt and peck and like dig through things to find where I was in standings. And then when I did, I was blown away because I had no idea that like things like 90% of podcasters drop off after 25 episodes. And so when they took, like, I got all the metrics back, I found a guy, right? Like, and he like did all the things for me. And he was like, you were in the top 20% of all podcasts. And I was like, what? I mean, like, why? Like, how? Like, compared to what? Like, I mean, compared to Joe Rogan? Like, what are we talking about right now? I mean, there's that 1%ers of the Joe Rogans and, you know, like they call her daddy girls and all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have like those big podcasts that are like killing it, but within the entrepreneurial spectrum, and you have these like, you know, kind of like me, like I'm just a guy, right? Like, like I'm not a celebrity, right? I'm just a guy. And like, I'm in the top 20% of just a guy category. And I'm like, that is insane to me. But I knew nothing about the metrics. So it was very interesting. But then I had clients that started podcasts. And so then I could start comparing my metrics to their metrics. And I was like, oh, yeah. You're getting like 7 downloads a week, right? Like you're getting 7 downloads a week. And I mean, and I'm getting 500. Like I get it. I understand.
Yeah. And it's so important to understand, even when you're looking at the metrics, you've already grown your audience before that, right? And so many people who start podcasts, they think this is where I should start. And I personally, my company does not work with people who are in the first year of business, because most likely you're going to shift and you're going to change what you're serving, who you're serving, what you're giving them. And so it doesn't make sense for you to start a podcast. That's a long-term strategy if that's not the thing you're going to stick with. And so knowing that, hey, you already have this established audience, of course you're going to get 500 downloads every week. Like, we've definitely seen that. And knowing that you are targeting with your podcast that bigger group, right? So you have more to pull from. Whereas someone who is maybe, like, we have one client where they teach women in tech who want to create WordPress website design businesses. That is a very niche market.
8 people.
Right? And so, like, but they have a decent number of downloads in their category. They're literally the only female-led podcast in this category. And so, like, doesn't matter what everybody else is doing and that you're getting 500 downloads, because are their target audience getting served? Yes. Goal met. Awesome. They're getting leads. They're getting people to join their programs. Like, that is where I think people kind of get hung up on those metrics of like, but I only had 7 people, but you had 7 people. Did you get a client? Are you taking them to that next step? Like, how are you connecting them? Where are you telling them to go next? Like, there's so much to it that I think people get lost in of like, oh, but she's doing this. No. What are your goals? Like, if your goal is to get a certain number of downloads, then okay, cool. Get that goal. But if it's to get clients, and how many clients are coming from your podcast, that's what you need to be tracking, right? I have an episode. We'll make sure that we link it in the show notes. I'm pretty sure I have 2 episodes that have to do about podcast stats, how to read them, what you should actually be looking at, especially, and this is one that nobody talks about, the average consumption rate of your episodes. So how much of an episode do people actually finish? If your episodes are super long, where are they dropping off? All that stuff. We'll make sure we link it in the show notes. Nicole, this has been so good and so helpful to get another perspective, which is kind of my perspective as well, but another one on how this all has worked for you. If you could tell everyone where to find you, where to listen to your podcast, join your Facebook group, all that fun stuff.
Okay, so I have a free gift for your audience. If you want to go to www.nonstopnotifications.com, that will give you the 100 wonderful ways to get more and better clients, right? And so this will also apply to your podcast and how you can strategically use client attraction strategies, energetically aligned ones, to create some conversions. The Facebook group is Unicorn Client Attraction Secrets for High Vibe Wonder Women. And Wonder Woman in my world is a mindset, not a gender bias. So all are welcome. And then, of course, the name of the podcast is Real Unicorns Don't Wear Pants. And, you know, it's pretty raw. So I'm warning you. You've been warned.
I love that.
It comes with the explicit tag.
Perfect. We'll make sure that we link all of that in the show notes. Again, Nicole, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.